Welcome back to another episode of Life Changing Challengers. Hey, everybody, I have Larry Onant with us today.
Onan. It's Onan. It looks Irish, but it's really French.
Really?
Well, there was the time of the Inquisition and the guillotine in France and the Huguenots, and I was a part of the Huguenot tribe, and we escaped to Ireland.
Ah,
So if you go back under the history, we went into Ireland, and then they changed the spelling of the name to blend into the culture. We got to the United States as well, but there's controversy over the apostrophe, but that's the family story.
all right, Larry, I know that you're probably a little bit older than me, but I know that you weren't actually part of the Huguenots. So let's,
That's way back in the dark ages, literally.
yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about your childhood and maybe what was the compliment of your family? Where did you grow up and what was it like to be Larry as a kid?
Well, I'm going to date myself, Brad, but I was born in 1944, right toward the end of World War II. I was born and was raised in a western Colorado town, Grand Junction, Colorado, which is the largest city between Denver and Salt Lake City. And my father was bivocational. He was a pastor of a startup church as well as he had a local business in that town. Now, at that time, that little town had 15, maybe 20,000 people. That was a big town back then. But that was where I was born and raised, spent my childhood there. I had a brother came along 5 years later and was surprised he came because nobody ever knew. I didn't at least know it. My mom was pregnant until they brought him home. But we got along really well because that was life back in the late 40s, I guess. But in my life experience took me to college, and I actually got involved in theater significantly in high school and decided that I was going to either be in Hollywood or New York. And I was at the University of Colorado with a theater major when I started to realize that the guys and gals that were in theater were acting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. For some reason, it never occurred to me that they were taking on a persona and everybody was pretty much fake, including myself. And that was a crisis of my life, actually, because for the first time I realized I didn't want to be acting all the time. I took on acting because it was fun for a few hours a day. But suddenly I saw people actually taking on personas that really weren't themselves at all because of emptiness and loneliness and confusion and heartbreak or whatever it was. But in that particular point of crisis, I decided that I didn't want to get into theater. I ended up graduating with a degree to teach theater arts and debate and speech and English. And the University of Colorado thought they were producing a teacher, but I never taught a day after I graduated from college. But that was, in a nutshell, that's me, a preacher's kid, a little town, the biggest, and a passion for the theater that took me in a radically different direction through a crisis of my own in junior in college.
Nice. I have a degree in theater myself, and I've done a lot of acting, directing, and some stylizing, sets and lighting and stuff like that. Design work is basically what I do.
Well, I gravitated toward the production side more than the acting side. I just enjoyed seeing script in a book become a reality and all the work that you put together. I really wasn't too excited about acting because you work for weeks and weeks and weeks, perform 5 times, and it's over. I love the idea of creating something from nothing or a concept on paper.
Right.
And
Yes.
if you looked at my life, I've done that over and over and over again. That was really what challenged me. And many of my life experiences were built on the fact of taking something from nothing and creating something out of it. So yes, I used all my training, but I never pursued theater.
I tried it. It didn't work. I ended up moving on from it. I was an actor. I loved acting and singing and the whole bit, and I loved directing. That's where I got into it. I did some semi-professional stuff in DC and Virginia. Unfortunately, it didn't work out like I wanted to, but you still get the bug once in a while.
I still buy season tickets and go to shows.
Yeah.
Now I'm taking grandkids.
Because and I pick up a show every once in a while. Somebody will sit there and call, "Hey, Brad, we got this perfect part and I lost my actor. Can you come in and fill in?" And I'll say, "Yeah, sure." And I'll get the bug and then I have it fulfilled for a while and to move on again. So you went to college, then you got this theater arts degree, got into some teaching. So what did you end up doing when you got out of college?
Well, The life change and the critical change of my life came as a junior when I just started realizing life was more than being on the stage and this acting thing where people were just doing it all the time. I was connected to a group of engineers, believe it or not. They had nothing to do with acting. I don't think they'd ever been in a theater. And I met them in a circumstantial, unique way. And their life was so genuine that just really impressed me. They weren't hard to get along with. They weren't what I thought engineers were. They were just real guys that really had a love both for each other. They had a love for the culture and a spiritual commitment in there too. And that really attracted me because I was raised as a preacher's kid and I had learned how to perform that role really well. But these guys weren't performing. They were very genuine in their heart. And that was an experience there that took me a few months to kind of work through. But the result was I said, I want to do something that's meaningful for life, not meaningful just for a few hours. And I got out of theater. I graduated and I went with one of the largest international ministries to college students worldwide. It's still one of the largest ones. Campus Crusade for Christ Crew International is what it's called. And I spent 20 years with that ministry. I worked at the University of Pennsylvania for a while. I was in the Northeast. Philadelphia was my home for at least a couple of years. So a Colorado kid got to see the rest of the United States that he never knew existed. I knew as far as Lincoln, Nebraska. And after that, I didn't know if it was a drop off to the abyss or if it really was a world out there. But that took me into quite a journey. But in that journey, what I thought I was going to do there, I probably in 20 years had 5 or 6 radically different kind of jobs. I thought I was going to do X, and pretty soon that gravitated to something else. My experience there was using my background in theater arts, not the acting side, but the directing side. And for 5 or 6 years, I put music groups together that would perform internationally and nationally. We had 5 groups in the United States and 2 overseas. And we would recruit the students, get them trained and equipped, and then we'd send them on tour for 9 months. And so I was over all of those groups and figuring out what kind of a new group we could create for some reason. And I thought I would probably spend the rest of my life creating production groups. And then I had a radical change there where suddenly in a group of 80,000 people, they announced a new person was going to be in charge of music. And I knew I'd lost my job that night while I was doing this big show. And for about 90 days, it was crisis. What does Larry do with the rest of his life? Because, I came up against it. It wasn't my decision. It wasn't even the guy's decision that was directly over me. It was just a organizational realignment. And then I was asked to go in and see the vice president of the organization, and he had a problem. That problem was 29 boxes of pledge cards that was filled out at one of those evenings where we had 80,000 people. And there had been an international funding pledge made, and all the cards, the commitments were collected and just boxed up. And this guy had 29 boxes of pledge cards in a bathtub in his office. It was a converted hotel, and he literally had a bathtub in his office. But he had stacked all these boxes thinking, what am I going to do with these? So I came into learning about fund development by asking if I could figure out how to follow up 29 boxes of pledge cards, almost $2.5 million worth of commitments. And I went from knowing absolutely nothing, but it really was, I took 29 boxes, took them to another office and said, what in the world do we do to even attempt to follow up a failure? Because this was 90 days after the pledges had been made and they were still in boxes. And we started, one other guy and I together began to figure out how do we even go about following up anything. And that took me into a career of 40 years of doing fund development, leadership, consulting, coaching, mentoring worldwide. But when I started, I knew nothing about the subject other than here's boxes and here's pledge cards. But I think that was the same context of it was a crisis because the organization had no clue what to do. And they were asking me to fail because they didn't know what to even tell me to do other than try something and see if it works. And I started trying things and seeing them work and tried again and saw if it would work. I learned something very valuable to my experience. I had one guy that was working with me and he kept telling me, Larry, you've always got the freedom to fail. Nobody really cares if you fail. It's not bad to fail. If you fail, all you do is pick yourself up, dust off the idea, tweak it a bit, and try again.
Hmm.
So if you don't learn to have the freedom to fail, you'll never test things out. You'll never try things that you cannot do. And for the first 12 years of my experience there, almost every month or every few weeks, we had a new freedom to fail because we didn't know what to do, but we started figuring out pieces of the puzzle. And lo and behold, we were successful many, many times. There were successes that we would not write home about, but it were still the idea behind it. And I think this is where people sometimes get stuck. They are frozen because they're afraid of the consequences.
Right.
And sometimes you've got to step out and just believe God, if you would like to think of it that way, but believe God for how he's going to lead you to do something. And the freedom to fail comes as a result of you stepping out to do that. But on many, many occasions, that was probably even to this day, when I get up against it and I don't know what to do with the situation, I go back to the fact that I got the freedom to fail. I'll try it. If it doesn't work, we'll tweak it and we'll adjust it. And, I've got experiences throughout life, which were challenges that were overwhelming, but the freedom to fail kept me saying, okay, there's got to be a way out of this one too. There's got to be a solution, and it's probably right in front of me, but I will not see it unless I keep moving toward it.
That is some amazing advice right there, is having the freedom to fail. I coached at a theater retreat in New York City, and there was a coach out there, and he always said, dare to fail. And then he had another one where basically when you talk about being on stage, he was like, dare to be stupid. Allow yourself to be stupid out there so you could learn something. But the dare to fail was kind of that was more kind of make that, because you're right, is like you dare, there's things that we won't do if we just are always going to succeed, if we're always going after the success. And we are going to the success. It's just giving yourself the permission to say, hey, listen, if I'm going there and I don't hit my mark, no big deal, brush myself off, get my lessons learned, try again. Yeah. So that is some really, really good advice. And that's something that people need to know about, that, once you try something, it doesn't mean it's the end. If you don't hit it the first time. And that's in our current society, with the entitlement that's out, it's like, that's what happens. People are like, oh, I want to try gymnastics. And the kids go out and they do a somersault and they do a cartwheel. And then all of a sudden they tell them to do a flip and they can't. They're like, oh no, I don't want to do this anymore. And that's just seems to be where we are. We're missing some of that drive. We don't have that anymore.
Well, in that drive world, another thing I really learned a lot about was setting goals that were not necessarily goals that had to be achieved, but they were goals to be dreamed of. In that experience I shared, I was in front of 80,000 people when I found my job had changed. Well, 8 months before then, the goal was to get 20,000 people there. And the leader of the organization said, I want to be aiming toward 100,000. We thought the guy had actually come close to losing his mind, because at 20,000 goal to move it to 100,000 just seemed totally ridiculous. Well, it became a movement across the United States to get thousands of kids to Dallas, Texas. When it was all over, we had 82,000 kids registered plus their sponsors. And the question came, do you feel badly that you failed? They said, well, you set a goal of 100,000, you had 82,000 students and you had sponsors. That's a failure. You didn't get to 100,000. And he said, if we had not set our goal at 100,000, we'd have been happy with 40. The goal was a visionary goal. It was not something I had to reach. I could say, I'm going to eat 3 times today, but maybe I'll eat 2. Did I fail by not eating 3?
There you go.
And I think many times people feel like, well, I can't make it, so I won't try it. And if I can't try it, then it's over. And it was a failure. And I think I learned over and over again that the visionary idea of planning towards something does not mean they're going to fail if you don't hit it. But if you don't have something concrete in your mind that you want to see as a success, then you're probably going to do much, much less because you don't have any way of monitoring a idea of that you want to see become reality. So 82,000 people and sponsors was not a failure, even though we were 15,000 people under 100,000. And I think many times people shortchange themselves by setting too low of goals. And so life becomes just kind of a boring experience in life because they don't know where they're going.
So I totally get that. My favorite, one of the favorite sayings I have is, as far as goals go, you shoot for the stars. And if you don't hit them, you catch the moon on the way back down.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So, and I always thought about that because it's the same thing. So, I'm an endurance coach. I help people get through marathons and get fit through endurance sports like Ironman, triathlon, and ultra marathons and OSCs and stuff like that. So we always go for that. We're like, hey, you want to, what we call BQ, which is a Boston qualify, and we always want to shoot for that 5 to 10 minutes underneath it. So to make sure that you can get to the race. And I'm like, all right, we're shooting for that. But if you hit just BQ on the way, that's fine. You'll get the letter. Maybe you won't get the race. Maybe you won't actually get to run the race, but you get that letter that says you qualified. Yeah. And then the next year we'll hit our 5-year. But then it's so much easier to take those 5 minutes off than it is to get down there in the first place. I mean, it's the same thing. Like you shoot for this, but you end up getting a personal record on the way back. And I think that's something that just needs to be kind of cemented in our brains. It's an old philosophy that needs to be brought back, because I think people just quit way too easy nowadays.
I think that we have a tendency to think that I will stop before I even get close to dreaming that I could do it. And I think that brings around frustrations. Purpose in life is achieving life. And I wrote a book called Intentional Living and Giving. The idea behind that is being intentional every day and living and giving everything that you've been given to somebody else. And that doesn't mean I know everything I've got to give today, but every day I can give something. Every day I can achieve an outcome that was worthy of me being here in the first place. And I think in my culture of observation, especially of younger people, they don't have a goal to begin with. They don't even know there is a opportunity out there to find something to achieve toward. And I feel badly for them, because life is not to be lived in a hovel or in darkness. Scripture says God is light and in him there's no darkness at all. Well, let's live in the light. Don't live in the shade, and achieve what you can achieve in a day's worth of time. Living and giving is, and all living and giving happens in the middle of crisis. I think many times we hope that we can live life and never have an accident, because we're concerned about an accident in driving our car. We're cautious when we drive. But we always get where we want to be unless you get restless and you start to become preoccupied, and then you're opening yourself up chaos. And you don't have to live in chaos. You don't have to live with an expectation that every day I'm going to crash. You've got to be conscious enough that you're driving for somebody else while you're driving for yourself. And I think sometimes we are living in a different world where we think, well, I can't make that happen. I don't know this. I'm watching young people change jobs 5 to 6 times a year because they don't find something that gives them fulfillment in life. And I think that's sad too, because some of these things are long-term runs. I mean, the marathon runner has got to pace himself. And you've lived with that experience. These guys don't do this just because they get up and run really fast or really hard. They know how to pace themselves for the entire run. A few years ago, I was in Hawaii, and we were there for the big Ironman competition. And I became friends of one of the guys that was running that. And he'd been planning for 3 years to do that particular run, and discipline.
Absolutely.
And then, I said, well, what does it take? He said, well, the first thing is to swim. And he described that to me. And I thought, well, that if I jumped in the water, that would be enough for me. And then it was the bike ride, 96 miles on bike and then 24 miles running. And it was an all-day deal before they could ever stop the process. But they knew where they were at because they were pacing themselves for the long haul. the Apostle Paul in the New Testament talks about running the race and preparing for the race and being ready to run. And then he comments in one of the letters to one of his mentors, I've run the race and I've achieved the prize, because and that was a 30-year life run. And I think many times if we don't see success in 2 weeks, we start getting itchy and thinking, well, this is not what I'm supposed to do. Life is a commitment to living, and it will throw you a lot of curves if you're really serious about growth.
Yeah, that's obviously another thing, is that life itself is a marathon. It's not a sprint.
That's right.
Unfortunately, we lose a lot. We've lost a lot as far as we call it paying our dues. When I started working in the line of work that I do to actually make money,
Yeah.
I'm in IT. I spent years doing data work and fumbling through numbers and codes before I was actually able to learn to hone a process to where that I could feed that into a team and then take that team and have them create something out of nothing. I knew that there was this times that, hey, you got to pay your dues. You got to learn the business, learn the craft. And you can't just go in there in the first week and say, oh, I don't like it, so I'm not going to stay. Oh, this isn't my passion. Well, you don't know it's your passion. Can you imagine? We got people that, lawyers, right? And they walk out of law school and they become an associate and inside of a big firm. And they're there for hours and hours and a couple of years before they finally get in front of a judge. And they first got to pass the bar, and then they're an intern, and then they become, like not a paralegal, but like a lawyer's second chair or third chair even. And they're doing the research and learning the business. I mean, can you imagine if we had all these lawyers coming into law school and they walked in their first week and they were just given books and things to read and things to do that were very menial and saying, oh, this is not what I thought lawyering was going to be. Screw it. That's $100,000 down the drain. Can you imagine if that was the case? And people don't want.
Well, we have so many people, I think, living today that are frustrated because it's not going fast enough. We are an instant society, and we're mad at McDonald's if it takes them an extra minute to get us French fries and a Big Mac or whatever it is. And yet life is designed to be lived, and you learn by doing, and you learn by experience, and you learn by negative experiences. I've learned far more about, I mentioned, 20 years of working in one organization. I was moved to 5 different kinds of jobs. If I had not been moved, I would never have been set up for the next one that really was my success. And sometimes it takes living close to the dirt level before you can appreciate that that's what you walk on. And then you will always appreciate it because it taught you something. And I just think many people are living almost without a view of what their purpose is and are frustrated because they cannot figure it out with what the first job they have. And I just feel badly for people that are living in that kind of constant whirlwind and always trying to get it quick and get it fast and get it easy. Life is not that way. Sometimes it'll be health. Sometimes it's a spiritual encounter. Sometimes it's a financial situation. It could be a family breakup or a confusion there. But all of those experiences that we live through can actually contribute to our growth later on.
No, please.
In 1967, I was working at the University of Pennsylvania, and part of my responsibility was networking with other universities and colleges. There's 57 at that time, 57 colleges or schools of higher education in the greater Philadelphia area. And I was working at the University of Pennsylvania and spending a little bit of time at Drexel University. I thought, well, I'm going to spread my wings and find out what's over in New Jersey. Princeton was over there, and there was a few more schools that I had names about. But I thought, well, I'll just find a church in New Jersey, and I'll start seeing if they have any college students. That was my goal. So I drove from downtown Philadelphia to New Jersey every weekend to associate with different college students that I would ever meet in Philadelphia or at the University of Pennsylvania. And one Sunday evening, I was going to go to a concert that it was at this church. It was a traditional church with a large choir and an orchestra and all this, but I knew I'd be running late because of other commitments. But I got there and had to sit in the very back of the sanctuary up into the balcony. And I discovered when I sat down there that I could not see the choir and I could not see the orchestra. For the first time in my life, everything had been clear in my eyes. But I was sitting there realizing that I thought, I'm going blind, because what I knew was clear was no longer clear. Now, after the show was over, I went down front and I could see everybody pretty clear there, but excuse me, it was a crisis, because I'm thinking, I'm going blind. What's going on with me? Well, it was about 5 months later that I was in California again, and I learned of a doctor in a little town near San Diego that was helping fit young adults with contact lenses. So I went to see him, and he looked at my eyes for a while, and he says, "You've got a rare eye disease." And he said, "You've got a thing called keratoconus." And he says, "Your cornea is the kerata. The conus is your cornea is shaped like a cone, and it's going to grow that way. You cannot stop the cone development." And he said, "But we can correct this to a great extent with the right kind of contact lenses." And this is 1967. And he said, "You will be getting a cornea transplant within the next 10 to 15 years.
Yeah.
So as a result of that, I started wearing contacts, and he told me, he says, "I'd like to get you connected to a specialist eventually," because he said it could really be a help to you to know who you're going to have do your cornea transplant. Well, I wore the contacts. Life went on. I actually had good eyesight. Brad, a week ago, I had a cornea transplant for the first time, 57 years later. Now, today, I'm looking through somebody else's cornea. A cornea transplant is one of the rare things they can do. So I received a 38-year-old's cornea that had died of a heart attack the week before. And last Monday, a week ago, they put the new cornea in my eye, and I can see you as good as I could see beforehand. Now, I'm still blurry at this juncture. It will take a year for this process of healing to take place. The only thing right now that holds my cornea in place is 16 very, very, very tiny stitches.
Wow.
And they're in my eye for a year. I will have a bonding between my donor's contact and my eye. And with the right kind of attention and intentionality of taking care of that lens, I'm stewarding somebody else's lens that's no longer living. Now, that's 7 days ago. The day after my cornea transplant, I could see better than I'm seeing in 10 or 15 years out of that eye. Now, the crisis started in 1967. 57 years later, and I've had to deal with carefully taking care of it over the years, but not in any pain or not any discomfort. But the point of it is, it's 57-year journey just on a cornea. And now for the first time, I've got somebody else's cornea that I'm stewarding, because the cornea is still alive. Now, the Bible says that we're fearfully and wonderfully made. That's a David hymn or a David psalm. And he talks about being fearfully and wonderfully made. What I discovered the morning after my cornea transplant, that in the next 7 days after I received the cornea, my cells would overtake the donor cells. And within 7 days, all of my eye would be covered with my own personal cells, and all of his cells would be eliminated. Now, that's being fearfully and wonderfully made, but it takes me now as a steward to take care of my eye correctly.
Right.
What may seem like a negative in 57 created an environment where I had to be diligently taking care of my eyes. In doing so, I got 57 years of life out of that cornea that was supposed to be replaced within 10 years. Now, I could have just thrown up my hands and chosen to do something else and got a cornea transplant 50 years ago. But at that time, they didn't have enough knowledge to even know for sure how to do cornea transplants. It was brand new into the market of transplanted material from the bodies. But because of discipline and choosing to take care of it and not becoming too rash and wanting to go too quickly, I was able to take care of something that I had no control over. I could not wish it away. It wasn't going to disappear because I had good thoughts. I had to choose to live with that reality. And I've lived 57 years of cornea transplant that you thought should have taken place at least 50 years ago.
Yeah, that's absolutely incredible. It's funny that you mentioned that because I got LASIK in 2003 and it was the exact same situation. I got on the table, I looked at the clock, I couldn't see it. Lay down, both eyes took less than 20 minutes. And then I sat up at the edge of the table. I looked at the clock, I could see it clear as day. It was amazing. So I have a little bit of similarity there. And I understand that. So you said that yours was shaped like a cone. Mine's shaped like, my corneas are shaped like footballs.
Okay.
Yeah, I have astigmatism.
It's in the realm of stigmatisms.
Right. You guys start to get more.
So now where it was a bump, now it became almost Mount Everest. And 7 months ago, I could no longer put a cornea or put a contact over the cone. Because now for the first time in my life, I was experiencing the conus. Now the cornea is bumping right up against the contact. And so I started wearing contact in my left eye. But I think that's a crisis of some side that will hit us. Well, I couldn't do anything about not having keratoconus. They say it comes from maybe genetics. They don't even know for certain what causes it. 1 in 2,000 people have keratoconus out there even today. So it's something that's pretty rare, but it can be managed. Crises can be managed if you choose to intentionally manage them.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's something that needs to go out as well, is that you go into a time in your life when you go through either a crisis or a long illness or, something's going on in your life, that there is a way, there is a light at the end of the tunnel.
Brad, and also takes a commitment to look for that light.
That's where I wanted to go. You took it right out of my mouth, Larry. I was all about it. It's like you can't expect it to come to you. You need to go get it. Just like you said that you were very diligent about taking care of your eyes and doing exactly what you were supposed to do. And that was the route you needed to take in order to extend that life before you had to get that corneal transplant. That was the route you needed to take. I've got people that I coach that they want to lose weight, and there's so many different routes. My route, the route of doing, like road races or trail races or something, that's the route they want to take. Instead of going to the gym and learning to diet and blah, 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 they decide, okay, I'm going to take this route instead. And sometimes it works. And sometimes if it doesn't, you go forward. But anyway, you were just about to talk, you were talking about it before, is the book that you wrote. That it's coming out, or is it out?
It came out last June, Brad. The book is a result of life experiences in many respects. I was doing the fund development back in probably 73, 74. And I'd had a lot of success in doing what I call fundraising. Now, fundraising is exchanges. You do this and I do this. In other words, if I give money to wounded warriors, they give me a blanket. That's fundraising. Nothing wrong with it. It's not a sinful thing to do, but there's always exchanges in fundraising. You do this for me and I'll do this for you. So t-shirts, blankets, trinkets, even runners get them on necklaces, all kinds of stuff. I really didn't like fundraising because there was a dark side of it, and that was manipulation. And I see it in the political stuff that I get. I got an email this morning, Larry, we can't believe that you failed us. We have not seen your membership renewal this year. And it's time for me to renew, but the language was disappointment in me because I'd not done it earlier. There's some manipulation going on there because I don't want anybody to feel badly for me, and they're counting on me to feel badly for myself and send them some money.
Right.
Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but there's a dark side to fundraising. I was trying to get people to do stuff that they didn't want to do. Give us money. That was really the goal, was to get money. And then I was in a meeting because I'd had quite a bit of success in these early days of trying and failing and experiencing that I'd gone to a meeting where I didn't really belong in the meeting. I was 31, 32 years of age. And the leadership were there and they were considering doing a campaign that would raise $1 billion. And I was invited because the consultants were going to outline how we could go about doing this. And I knew in looking around the room, Larry, you could disappear and nobody would even know you left the room, but you liked everybody and they all liked you. It was congenial friendliness, but it really was, Larry really probably doesn't belong here. Well, the consultants outlined something that we had to do. And there was quite a bit of argument about it because the organization was not wanting to start another department or another program. The only people that had raised that kind of money at that particular time was Harvard and Stanford with their endowments. And so, you were competing against endowment money, not money that you could actually spend. There's a very different routine. In today's period of time, you're learning what Harvard has hidden away in the bushes, and that's their endowment, which is bigger than most states. But at that time, I was sitting there and they said, well, in the argument, let's assign this to Larry and maybe he can figure out what we should do with this particular challenge. And I wrote down on a yellow pad what the task was, figure out what lifestyle stewardship is for the ministry. And then underneath it, I wrote my old phrase, Larry, you got the freedom to fail. And because I have a high degree of responsibility in my wheelhouse, about 5-6 weeks later, I thought I had done nothing about this responsibility. And ironically, nobody had even asked me how I was coming on the responsibility. So there was no accountability, but I thought we've got to figure this out. This may be something that we really do need. So I brought my team leaders together and I said, we've got to figure out what this really means. Our consultants were so insistent that we do this right. And if we don't do it right, we could be a failure at it. So over a period of about 6 or 8 months, there was a team of us working on it, and we came up with biblical principles of lifestyle stewardship. It was just, what does Scripture have to say about a person that's a steward? A steward is not a person that gives money. A steward is managing somebody else's affairs. That's all that it is. It's an accounting term in many respects because accountants a lot of times would manage the money for somebody else. Or a stewardship responsibility, if you get on United or Delta or whatever airline today, you have stewardesses. They are there on behalf of the owner of that airplane to make sure that we don't mess up the airplane. They may be nice and they give us Cokes and they give us snacks or whatever it takes. They do a routine, but they're really an evil eye watching every move we make because they're working on behalf of the owner of that high cost product that's up in the air. They are stewards for United or Delta. They are not just there to make us happy. Now, part of making us happy keeps us also from doing crazy things in the airplane. But the reality is a steward is working on behalf of somebody else to take care of somebody else's affairs. And if you get that picture in your mind, you're going to start realizing, okay, I was put here on earth to manage somebody else's affairs. I don't own anything. I have a car that the state of California says I own, my SUV, but in reality, it's not mine. I live in a house. I've got to pay taxes on it. I'm stewarding my house. I'm actually stewarding a donor's cornea. It's not my cornea. I didn't create what he gave me a week ago. Somebody else did that. I'm to steward it. So if you start to understand a biblical view of stewardship or a lifestyle of managing somebody else's affairs, you become purpose-driven on how you live your life. And instead of living my life for myself and only me counts and everything is centered around my success and my peace and my joy and everything else, I'm here to manage somebody else's affairs. So every morning I wake up saying, what am I to do today to manage the affairs that you've entrusted with me today? It's a spiritual experience, but it's a practical experience. So I don't own a thing, but I steward everything. I'm not broke, but I have no money. because it's somebody else's money. My mindset is around intentionally living life and giving what was given to me to help advance the cause of other people's needs that they've got. And that does not mean I'm giving a lot of money away. I'm managing the affairs that I've got so that other people are blessed and they can manage their affairs well. The book, Intentional Living and Giving, that came out in June of last year, and you can get that book, Brad. It's available on, Amazon or Barnes and Noble. You go to any place you want to find books, you can find it. If people are desperate to get an autographed copy, then they need to go to larryonan.com and I'll sign them a copy. But I would prefer you to get the copy the fastest way you can get it, and that's by Amazon, not through Larry Onan. But the book is designed around the core principles. 9 chapters deal with the biblical principles, Old Testament into New Testament. So it's a scriptural context. And then the latter 9 chapters is now that you understand that you are what I call an authorized wealth distributor. When you understand who you are, then there's 9 chapters on practicality of how you live that life day to day and function within the realm and the world that we live in. So there's 9 chapters for understanding the principle. And then once you got it, how do you apply that to your life? Intentional living and giving. Intentional is important because if we don't decide we're going to do something, we won't do it. Yeah. Then the living is every single day. And then you're a steward. So you're managing somebody else's fare. How do you give what you've already got away using your time, your talent, your treasure, your skills? There's things you don't want me to do for you, Brad. And there's things I can do well for you. And I know myself well enough that I'm going to tell you, no, you don't want me to do X. So I can, as a steward, you don't want me to do it because I'm not good at certain things. Other things I'm really good at. So yes, I can step into the life and help somebody else out. And it's my job to decide how I best manage the stewardship of time and do the things that would help other people out. And many of the stories in the book come from life experiences, with many of them being tied around a crisis of confusion at that particular time.
Yeah.
I remember people, they think, okay, Larry's fine. He's 81 years of age. Well, my wife died 10 years ago of a glioblastoma brain tumor. Now, it was an experience that I didn't want to live through. I would not advise anybody to live through watching a person die of a terminal disease. It took her 18 months to do so after surgery. But, I looked at that and I said, okay, I can see that we had 44 years of wonderful life together. Great kids, great everything. We were best of friends. But the season was over for us to do that together. My season now is to take that crisis and leverage that to new things while I'm here. And while I'm healthy, I've still got responsibility. It did not change my stewardship responsibility in life just because she changed addresses on me. And so I think sometimes we think, well, I can't live through that, or I get stuck in this and I can't move. You can get up every day and decide, you're making a choice to get up and do things intentionally. So I believe there's a very strong biblical faith commitment to it. There's a very practical side to it. There's a way of understanding how you leverage life that way. So yeah, I want to help people that are down and out and feeling frustrated and don't know where they're going be thriving in purpose. That's what the whole book is about. And achieving goals and helping people live a life. That's what the book is all about. So yeah, it's a little thing, but it's really my life on pages. I guess that's what you'd call it.
That is amazing. And that's exactly what our audience here is looking for. Looking for information on how to make their life the potential that it's supposed to be. Right. It's finding their potential and then getting little bits of information here and there on how to get there. Right. And you have already given us intentional stewardship. All of those little nuggets can all help us move into the direction that we want to go in and get to the potential of our lives.
Well, one of the editors of the book years ago, when I was in the middle of putting the thing together, he said, this is not really a book. It's a guide. It's a map. And the map is telling you how to utilize the map for 9 chapters, what the principles are behind the map. One of the things my wife could never do in her entire life is she could not read a map. And for some reason, she was not wired in the fourth grade to read maps like they teach you how to do in the fourth grade. So she lived by guideposts and by signs. She knew where the McDonald's was, and you turn left at McDonald's and you turn right at Starbucks. And that was the way.
Yep.
My mice, in 44 years, I watched a person that did not know where they were on this planet. She functioned really well, but mapping was not one of those things. And I think many people, if they don't have the map in their hand, they do not know how to get someplace. I tell people, I live in Southern California. And I say, if you're going to go to Dallas, Texas, you go one way, but if you go to Seattle, Washington, you're going to go another. And if you're not going to get to Seattle by driving to Dallas. And they're both freeways. They're good roads going both directions, but you've got to choose your destination before you choose the map that you're going to follow. And I think if people just have that as a mindset, if they say, I need to have a guidebook or a guide map to get me to where I can live a victorious, thriving life, you better get a hold of intentional living and giving. And then just follow the principles. They're pretty well outlined. We've used them worldwide. Many people have seen transformation occur over these principles for 30 to 40 years.
Oh man, and I am like really excited to read it myself. So we're going to go ahead and put that link to the book in the show notes.
Okay.
We're also going to put your website right there in the show notes. That actually is LarryOnan.com.
That's the easiest way to reach me out. Just LarryOnan.com. I'll eventually see it.
Yep. And then he's got a contact page in there too. So he gives you, obviously no way to reach to him. Are you on any of the social medias?
You can find the Intentional Living and Giving and Larry Onan on Facebook. LinkedIn, I'm out there as well. Common things. At 81 years of age, I'm not into everything that comes out there. My 23-year-old grandson, he can jump into any of them, but he says to me, Grandpa, I don't use Facebook.
Oh yeah, no. Facebook is for us now.
Yeah, it's for
if you've gotten to 50, now you're Facebook. You know what I mean?
And that's only been a decade that really became the thing out there.
So then, now it's like now Instagram and TikTok, and and don't be on Pinterest.
Yeah.
Oh no, that's for old ladies. But isn't it amazing? Because the majority of the people out here can't use a map.
Well,
They have to use the GPS on their phone.
Well, I don't know how many times over the years she'd say, I've got to go to XYZ restaurant tomorrow to meet somebody, get in the car, and we're going to drive there now. And I'm going to write down all the signs of where I turn. And I would literally drive her to that Starbucks or XYZ restaurant. And she would sit in the car and write her notes so she know where to turn at her sign. Now, in GPS today, you say, I need to go to XYZ address, and then start talking to you and tell you where you're going to turn. I was the GPS 25 years ago, but it was the old mechanical way. Again,
right.
That's a good illustration is that you may be stuck on a liability or something you do not do well. Anybody can conquer something. It's what happens to us is that's a weakness to her. My weakness is numbers. You don't want me to help you with accounting and numbers. I can do those things. But at the end of the day, when I'm doing numbers, I'm exhausted. When I'm doing something in my strength, I'm energized and I can keep right on going. You can do a weakness to accomplish your strength. And just know that in the process of the weakness, you're going to wipe yourself out and be tired. But you can do it. There's a lot of things you can do. You just don't like to do it.
Exactly.
And so we need to find out what is our strength and run with it with great joy and anticipation. I'm not a runner, but I'm a swimmer. I don't like the idea of running what you've trained people to do. But years ago, I've decided I do like to swim. So except for this season when I can't get my head in the water for probably 6 months, I swim 3 days a week and do a mile 3 days a week at 5 a.m. It's because I'm choosing to do something that's healthy, but I found something that is my sweet spot, but it's not everybody else's. So find what makes you work and go for it, but get some ground rules, get the principles down. you're not going to win this game of intentional living unless you understand what you're doing with it.
Truer words could not have been said. Larry, you know what? I have to say thank you so much for joining us. And what I just want, you ended on such a perfect note. So for all of you listening, everything's in the show notes. We're going to make sure that Larry's website, the social media places where he is, his platforms that he's on, those are going to be in there. The direct link to the book on Amazon is going to be there. You're going to have everything that you need to contact him. And he, like he just told you, he's more than willing to talk. If you are watching on YouTube, if you can go ahead and hit that subscribe, that like button, and then you can hit that notification bell so you always know when the next episode is dropping. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, if you can leave a review, we definitely appreciate it. But Larry, thank you so much. You've given such a wealth of knowledge and a way to live through intention and through grace. And I think that is by far the best thing that we could possibly do in our lives today.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
And thank you all for listening. I appreciate it. And we will see you in the next one.